In January of 1867, one of the most famous missionaries of all time landed on the eastern coast of Tanzania.
Through Zanzibar, he traveled into the interior, straight behind me to the south, into what are now called the Livingston Mountains.
With the goal of spreading the gospel and seeking to end the slave trade, David Livingston set out on a trek that would take him hundreds of miles across modern Tanzania, Malawi, and the Congo.
Before Livingston came, Africa was known as the Dark Continent, for more than one reason. It was dark because most people in the West simply didn't know what was on the interior.
It was also dark in another way. At the turn of the 19th century, the interior of Africa was almost completely shut off from the gospel.
We are really right in the middle of a large area of East Africa where David Livingston ministered the gospel 200 years ago. He entered eastern Tanzania and traveled through Tanzania down into Malawi. We're really right in the center of a number of places where David Livingston shared the gospel.
When Livingston first landed on the continent and shared the gospel with the Bakwain tribe, their chieftain, Seychelles, asked Livingston, "Why have your forefathers been told of the future judgment when ours were left in ignorance to pass away into darkness?" Livingston had determined no more would be lost and devoted his life to reaching the African interior.
Really, we'd say this was a faithful missionary, a great example of a pioneer missionary who came in and appreciated the local culture and sought to understand and learn their language and be able to share the gospel in a way that they could understand.
When he departed Zanzibar early in 1867, he did not know the journey would be his last. His health was poor, but he was determined to reach the unreached tribes.
Before Livingston, all that was known of Africa was the outer shores, the second largest continent in the world, and the gospel had only come to a few of the outer shores. Livingston charted the entire width of Africa.
He and his team followed the Ruvuma River, reaching modern Lake Malawi in 1866. There, they tried to convert both the local tribes and the Arab slave traders and convince them to abandon their evil trade. In 1867, he began working his way north into modern Tanzania, visiting the tribes along the shores of Lake Tanganyika, which dominates the western border of modern Tanzania and the Congo. Here, he worked for 6 years, preaching the gospel in the surrounding communities and planting gospel seeds.
There's a spiritual genealogy that can be traced from David Livingston down to the pastors that we are now getting to invest in.
We have some students who have been, I can say their four grandfathers were ministered by Dr. David Livingston.
After baptizing many East African believers, David Livingston died on May 1st, 1873, having brought the light to the dark continent. The gospel light has been shining in East Africa for 156 years. Yet, in 2022, darkness still pervades.
Africa, in many parts, is not yet reached. What sometimes you see on TV is not what is found in the background here in the grassroots. It's the opposite when you come here.
Even though the church in this area has been here for 200 years, the state of the church is dire. Many local church leaders still practice witchcraft. They're syncretists, which means they mix the gospel with their local tribal religions.
Many of these pastors who are Christians, we think, they've received the gospel message, but what they are teaching does not actually sound like Christianity. Oftentimes the message they are preaching is distorted.
It's easy for a witch doctor or a local tribal chief to say, yes, I love Jesus, but also I worship my tribal elders or my ancestors. Also, I participate in these acts of witchcraft. And so even though the gospel has been here and there are true believers here, it's deceptive when we look at a map of Christianity and it says that Tanzania is reached. The truth is far from the case.
We have many false prophets who are taking advantage of the poverty in Africa. You know, they can come and say, okay, we are selling you water. You go take this water and this water will make you rich. So people are accepting Jesus because they want to escape from poverty. This is not the gospel at all. It's something else.
One of the major responsibilities we have as Bible teachers here in Africa, and especially in this area, is to help them to see that that's not Christianity, and some of them are not even Christians. Pastors, they're currently serving as pastors, and yet they do not know the gospel. They're not preaching the true gospel, and they're not living in a way that's consistent with the gospel.
The reached are at risk of being unreached again. Yet there is hope.
We need to fulfill both sides of the Great Commission, not only to go and make disciples, but to teach them everything that Christ has commanded of us, to raise up people who will be making disciples in a real and orthodox faith.
It's our conviction at Teaching Truth International that they need to be continually invested in by teaching pastors the Bible and theology so that they can understand the core aspects of Christianity and be faithful to the gospel.
And so TTI exists to make sure that the missions movement doesn't stop, that the reached peoples don't become unreached, that the shores of God's kingdom don't contract, to make sure that the indigenous people are carrying on the gospel.
Teaching Truth International exists to raise up local East African leaders who can stand against the darkness. Local pastors and church leaders who resist the darkness and stand on the truth. An army of men and women who can faithfully hand down the gospel to the next generation to ensure East Africa will not be unreached again.